Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. I'm Natasha Feroze, the Spectator's Deputy Broadcast Editor. Today in Bangladesh, the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has resigned from government and fled the country. This comes after hundreds of thousands of people were protesting on the streets over the weekend, and hundreds of students have been shot in protesting. Why has this happened? Joining me to discuss this is Sushant Singh, a lecturer at Yale and consulting editor of the Caravan India. Sushant Singh, thank you for joining us on Spectator TV. We saw dramatic scenes in Bangladesh over the weekend and now today with Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina resigning and fleeing to New Delhi. Could you just tell us briefly, for any of our viewers that don't know what's been going on, what has happened in the past 48 hours?
So essentially, these were massive protests which have taken place from the first week of July onwards. And these were protests which were led by students over a reservation quota in jobs for people who had fought in the freedom movement and the freedom struggle of Bangladesh in 1971. So Sheikh Hasina had passed an order that people who were the inheritors or people who were children and grandchildren of those who fought for Bangladesh's freedom against Pakistan in 1971 would continue to get reservation in government jobs and in education institutions. And there were massive protests against this by students starting early July. Against which, the police and the security forces and the army had come down on the streets, had fired on them. Over the last couple of days, suddenly these protests took a very dramatic and very aggressive turn. And the army seemed to be under pressure. The security forces seemed to be under tremendous pressure because of the popular support that these protests had garnered. And they were not willing to anymore fire upon the protesters or stop these students, despite Sheikh Hasina asking them to do it. They were discontent within the armed forces itself and within their extended families. Many retired military officers had come on record and said, we should not be doing this. And eventually, more than 100 people, I believe, have been killed in the last 48 hours before Sheikh Hasina today decided to, leave office and essentially took a safe passage, which we believe is to the United Kingdom. But currently, she is in India, in Delhi, in Delhi right now.
And could you talk a little bit more about how the police and the army seems to have sort of turned on Sheikh Hasina? Because, there have been dramatic scenes, very shocking footage today of hundreds of people storming her building, and there's pictures of people stealing her saris. There's pictures of people in her bedroom. Surely this is a massive security breach that the police must have sort of allowed to happen.
Yes, absolutely. But I think all those visuals that you saw out of Prime Minister's house have actually happened after Sheikh Hasina has flown away in an helicopter, eventually in a C-130 military aircraft. But essentially, the pressure had been building on for a long time. As you know, for the last 15 years, she has been in power, and she has not been the most democratic leader that you can think of. Her party has won 80%, 90% of the seats that they have contested in the last three parliamentary elections. No opposition party has contested these elections. There's been huge anger on the street. And essentially, she has survived through the idea that, I'm going to bring the Bangladeshi economy is going to do very well. Your lives are going to improve. And as the Bangladeshi economy came under pressure in the last couple of years, I think all that combined together to create this movement where this small trigger of these reservation and the jobs actually blew the whole thing apart. But all this had been building up for a long, long time. It is just that it required this last trigger to blow it up.
So, Shank, could you explain a little bit more for our viewers about this quotas policy that's been at the pinnacle of this argument? Because I'm not sure everyone completely understands it. My understanding is that in 2024, the Supreme Court allowed a 30% quota for families of freedom fighters into government. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So Supreme Court only allowed after the government passed an order extending the quota to the next generation of the families of freedom fighters. So, nobody grudges the freedom fighters who fought and suffered heavily or even their children. But, to continue that policy in perpetuity. And essentially, all of them are supporters of Sheikh Hasina. Sheikh Hasina's father is the founding father of Bangladesh and had fought for the freedom struggle. It's essentially seen as a way of, of supporting or giving benefits to her supporters, her party workers, people who had supported her father and people who are supporting him. And that is why, continuation of that policy ad infinitum to next generation has caused so much of resentment. Essentially, after these protests had gone on for a couple of weeks, the Bangladesh Supreme Court actually cancelled that policy. But clearly, the anger had really risen, and that anger could not be subsided even after the policy was cancelled by the Supreme Court of Bangladesh.
And now there's a military interim government in Bangladesh, and Chief of the Army, General Waker-Uz-Zaman, has announced that he will be in charge of the political transition, a role that he has only had for a month. Could you tell me a little bit about his appointment and what a interim army government could look like? Obviously, historically in Bangladesh, this is a very contentious thing to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Bangladesh has seen military governments previously, and the last one was between 2006 and 2008, where there was a technocratic government supported by the army. And before that, in the late 70s, between 1978 and 1986, Bangladesh was under martial law and under military rule. The current army chief, as you said, only became the army chief in end of June, and he actually was seen to be very close to the prime minister, to Sheikh Hasina. He had served in prime minister's office as a military advisor, and her father-in-law had also been an army chief when Sheikh Hasina was a prime minister much earlier in 2001. So this he was seen as a loyalist. He was seen as someone who was very loyal to the establishment, very loyal to Sheikh Hasina. But clearly, the pressure from the rank and file, from other officers, from retired officers, and from the general public was so huge, so massive that he didn't want to take it on, and has clearly, strong institution. The army in Bangladesh is a very strong institution, like it is in Pakistan and in many other South Asian countries. And these institutions have a way of their own, where even if the leader is loyal to the prime minister, the institution pushes the leaders to take a very different path. And that is something what has clearly happened in Bangladesh. As far as the government is concerned, new government is concerned, the army chief is still consulting with various political parties, including the Jamaat-e-Islami, the so-called radical Islamist group which Sheikh Hasina had banned, whereas I believe Sheikh Hasina's party, the Awami League, is not part of those consultations yet. What comes out of those consultations is not known yet, but what one can clearly foresee, there would be some kind of a technocratic government where maybe a retired judge would be made the prime minister and the administrator. There would be a few retired military officials, few retired bureaucrats, and they will try and bring all of them together to create a semblance of a technocratic, efficient government, neutral government. And eventually, if not immediately, maybe in a year's time or a couple of years' time, they will have to go and hold some form of elections, whether they would be very managed elections, whether they would be free and fair democratic elections. It is very hard to predict it at this point of time. But that's the path Bangladesh seems to be taking right now.
Sorry to interrupt the show, but if you enjoy what we do here at Spectator TV, then why not subscribe to the magazine as well? If you subscribe today, you get 12 weeks for just £12, plus a free £20 John Lewis and Waitrose gift card. You can sign up at spectator.co.uk/TV offer.
Yeah, and I just want to ask one more quick question about Hasina and the army, because it was her father that was assassinated by someone in the army many years ago when he was prime minister. I mean, how did she get into a situation where her relationship with one of the top army generals was very good? Surely she would have had a very difficult relationship with the army throughout her reign.
Yeah, you're right, absolutely. Her father, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, was assassinated on 15th of August, 1975, and a military coup was conducted against him. Sheikh Hasina herself saw, in her second tenure as prime minister, an attempt to unseat her, and a kind of a coup attempt by one of the paramilitary forces, which she was able to quell. But since then, she was seen as this very powerful, completely, a leader who was in complete control of everything in Bangladesh. And it is extremely surprising that the army has taken a position which is contrary to her. So in a country like Bangladesh, the people who go up the army chain in the military hierarchy are all chosen by her. They have to be personally loyal to her. So in this case, I think the anger on the street, the anger within the retired military community, within the families, and the overall discontent with the economic situation, with the political situation, with the social situation, is just blew apart. And even an army chief who's loyal to her could not take a position where he was seen to be going against the people of the country.
When it comes to the students, some of the things they were requesting, they were asking Bangladeshis to stop paying their taxes, to remove themselves from public life. Do you think it's a matter of their campaigning tactics that were very successful, or were they already pushing at an open door?
I think both. The campaigning tactics was definitely successful. Please remember that between the ages of 16 and 25, 40% of Bangladeshis do not have any work. The unemployment rate is very, very high. So you are talking about a very young country and in a country where discontentment is already high. Now, after the July protests, it was pretty much clear that the political opposition and other social groups like the Jamatis, which are very powerful groups with very strong roots within sections of society, had clearly decided to back these students and their protests, and that is something which we have seen. The doors, as you said, were almost they were at least unlocked if they were not open, and the students really pushed them open with the backing of all these other groups, all these other people who were opposing Sheikh Hasina at this point in time. Let us not forget, this would not have happened had the army not decided to stay away. Till the time the army was willing to come out and shoot at sight, stop these people, put the barricades up, there was no way Sheikh Hasina was going to go away. The moment the army said that we are no longer willing to fire at these young men, or we are no longer willing to put those barricades, it is at that point in time that Sheikh Hasina had to go away. So we must recognize that while these protests had the momentum, they provided the mass fervor and the popular support. The fact is that the army had to concede before Sheikh Hasina actually moved away.
And that probably explains why she had to flee the country quite so quickly. Also, Sushant, what do you think about her relationship with India and Modi? She's obviously, it's alleged that the first place she flew to was New Delhi. Do you think that her relationship, her closeness with Modi could have impeded her future as prime minister? And do you think what would a future government, Bangladeshi government, what type of relationship would they need to have with India?
Yeah, so India is their biggest neighbor, and the Awami League, Sheikh Hasina's party, and her father have historically been very, very close to India. And that's a charge, that's an allegation that have been made against them, that they are puppets of India, and they pursue policies which are favorable to India. Sheikh Hasina is not only close to Modi, but also close to India's political opposition. Sheikh Hasina and her party have been close to all sections of society in India, and there's a huge amount of anger and sadness in India that Sheikh Hasina has been thrown up, has been forced to move out of office in Bangladesh in that sense. But as you clearly said, this does work against her in Dhaka and in Bangladesh, where she is not seen as somebody who's acting independently or working in the interests of Bangladesh, but she is often alleged to be acting at the behest of India or as a puppet of India. You'd be surprised that in 2023, last year, Mr. Modi and Sheikh Hasina actually met 10 times. They've already met a few times even this year. So she is actually very close to Mr. Modi. And clearly the fact that she chose to come to Delhi before is, as we are being told, likely to go to London, where her niece is a minister in the Labour government. It clearly shows that she's close to India. Does it matter to India? Yes. Not having a government which is friendly in Bangladesh would be a problem for India. In most of the places, in Myanmar, you have a military junta. In Pakistan, you have a government which is not friendly with India. In Nepal, you have a government which is not friendly with India. And in Bangladesh, having this instability in Bangladesh would not work out well for India. There are huge security issues in India's northeast, which neighbors Bangladesh. And having a friendly government in Bangladesh allows India to control those insurgencies, those separatist movements. If there's a government which is not friendly with India, those insurgencies, those separatist movements always gain a lot of attention. Then there are questions about treatments of Hindus in Bangladesh, who form around 10% of the population there in Bangladesh. What happens to those Hindus? Do they start coming into India as refugees? So, all those kinds of questions will start coming into play as and when a new government comes to power. But the big question with respect to India is any government which is in Dhaka would want to be friendly to both Beijing and to Delhi. But it is the people of Bangladesh who, at this point in time, because they are so angry with Sheikh Hasina, and Sheikh Hasina is seen to be having Delhi's backing, would be very angry with Delhi. And it is this popular anger in Bangladesh against Delhi that would hurt India at this point and for some time to come.
Lastly, Shashank, can you see a world in which the next election in Bangladesh after this interim government as formed by the military, can you see a scenario in which they have a free and fair general election where Bangladeshis can vote for the party that they would like?
I would want to believe that, but as we have seen with most countries in South Asia, most militaries come to power promising that they will provide, over a period of time, there will be free and fair elections, but eventually it doesn't happen. And especially considering the economic situation and the all the troubles that are there, and all the kind of social challenges, the political anger on the streets, I do not think that free and fair elections would be possible in the short term. This will go on for some time. There'll be some kind of technocratic setup. Then there'll be again, some kind of we need to bring the situation under control. We need to punish people who have done wrong, so on and so forth. And then by that time, so much time has passed that political parties, political leaders, social activists, they start getting angry, they start getting jittery, and then you have the usual contestation that starts taking place. I would love to see free and fair elections in Bangladesh, but it is very hard to predict at this point in time. And there are very few examples in South Asia where such a thing has happened very quickly or very soon after the military has captured power from a democratic